Szanowni Państwo, Ekscelencje, abonenci, przyjaciele. Welcome to the Warsaw European Conversation. These are serious times, and such times demand serious measures. At today's Warsaw European Conversation, we will not solve the problems of the world. What we want to do is to find the right people to ask the right questions, to examine the possible answers, to think of the actions that need to be taken in order to start moving in the right direction. We need to have a serious conversation about Europe. We need it now, and we need it here. This was how we started the Warsaw European Conversation. Today, we bring you 4 podcasts in which, with our moderators, speakers, and friends, we examine the topics discussed during our annual conference. ECFR's Marta Prochwicz-Jazowska asked about the European response to geopolitical changes. Nico Lange, senior fellow at the Munich Security Conference, discussed Germany's role in strengthening Europe, while Sinikukka Saari, research director at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, spoke about the new security architecture and Finland's approach towards Russia.
So Nico, thank you very much for meeting us. We are in a separate room, but at the Warsaw European Conversation, interviewing different people who are speaking on panels. And the topic we're going to talk about is obviously Germany. And what we saw recently happen in the election is exactly the direction in which Poland wanted that to happen. And Friedrich Merz managed to secure himself the best position that he could have under these circumstances. And he has the opportunity to build a stable coalition with SPD. His stance has been that Germany should be a leading power in Europe and has already worked on establishing close contacts with Poland, with France, and other European governments during the campaign. He seems to recognize that the scale of challenges is large and sees Germany as a key state in meeting them. So, at the same time, we're seeing President Macron being very active in reacting to the geopolitical shifts that we're witnessing, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And the challenge here, and this is my first question to you, we need Germany on board to be able to face the challenges that are ahead of us, with Europe being squeezed from 2 sides, if I can put it that way. How do you see Friedrich Merz fitting into that triangle?
First of all, thank you for having me. I notice everywhere, including here in Warsaw, that the expectations on Friedrich Merz and the new German government are very high. At the same time, his mandate in Germany is relatively weak. The election result was not as good as the CDU-CSU would have wanted it. He needs already now, while we are speaking, he needs a couple of other parties to change the constitution to free up money for governing. And he has, with the SPD, a coalition partner that has been part of the wrong policies for the last period of time. So it will be interesting to see if Friedrich Merz can match the very high expectations with producing enough stability domestically in Germany to move forward. I think what we can trust in is that he has a classic, but in a good sense, European compass, a Helmut Kohlian compass of Europe, which will bring Germany closer to Central Eastern Europe and to Northern Europe. And I think this was a big deficit in the Scholz government times. And I would be modest. It's not about Germany being reluctant for such a long time and then come around the corner and say, look, we are the leaders now. I think it's about Germany catching up to the Central Eastern Europeans, to the Northern Europeans, to the developments that have been there. And that would already change a lot when it comes to Ukraine policy, when it comes to European security. But let me also say, I know that everybody now is talking about Europe being squeezed from 2 sides. The enemy is still Vladimir Putin and Russia that is starting a war of aggression. And when it comes to the US, my advice is keep calm and build capabilities, but not contribute from our side to transatlantic disconnect.
But the capabilities are exactly the reason why we need Germany so badly in this deal, both in terms of resources, money, as well as industrial base. And this is why, I guess, there's so much expectations linked to the future of the German policy.
Yeah, and I mean, I was in government until the last elections 3.5 years ago, and I tried from within government. I'm trying outside now and before to push Germany Germany into the right direction, like many partners are. It's super frustrating. Germany is still too slow, too reluctant, too risk-averse. And if you look at the so-called Zeitenwende, yes, we have a Minister of Defense with Boris Pistorius who is saying the right things. But is that enough? It's not about having a conversation. It's about doing the right things. So I think the pressure on Germany needs to be kept up. And let's hope this new government is moving into the right direction. But after the experiences of the last years, I remain a little bit skeptical if Germany can be radical enough in the reforms it needs to undertake, getting the Bundeswehr ready, getting procurement right, investment into future defense technologies. But at least there is some movement now. Germany may be doing better than in the last term. Also movement on the European stage when it comes to European defense. So there is maybe hope for slight optimism. But let's also be realistic. It's unlikely that with this weak mandate and the SPD in coalition, Germany will turn around completely and have a real Zeitenwende.
Can I just a follow-up question on that? Given your government experience, can you assess, and of course you may not be willing to share all your experience, but can you assess what should be the level of German defense spending and for how long in order to restore the power required by today's challenges?
You know what? I formed a radical opinion about this, also from my government experience. You can also spend a ton of money on the wrong things and spend it very slowly. So unless you do not use the new money to fundamentally change the structures, it will be very difficult. Pouring hundreds of billions into a system that everybody knows is dysfunctional will not produce better results. And to be honest, changes also means throw some people out. Let's have other people who are making decisions about procurement, technology. Let's also get rid of some of the military bureaucracy that we have. And that's where I'm looking with interest if the new government has the strength to do the structural reforms that are needed to move forward. When it comes to the spending, I will not dodge the question. If the constitution is changed now in Germany, I think it will allow Germany to raise the defense budget to 100 billion per year quickly. That will be around 2.5% of GDP. I think the goal should be 3% of GDP defense spending and 0.5% of it directly in Ukraine and for Ukraine. That is what I think would make a reasonable difference with Germany, such a big country as it is. But it also has to be absorbed by industry. And building up industrial capabilities after such a long time is slow and bureaucratic, so you need also to remove some red tape. I mean, building an ammunition factory in Germany is a nightmare, but we cannot afford 2-year permission processes for that. We need to do it faster. So Germany will now have the chance to do things right, but the reforms need to be connected to the money.
So you're doing a lot of management of expectations, which is probably very good. But what do you think will actually happen? Will there be the reform of the debt brake? Will Germany be able to spend that? And given the fact that we have money on the European level and commitments of the 150 billion, does that shut the door as to the possibility of a common budget spent on defense? Or on the contrary, does that actually open up the conversation in Germany, and is the public on board?
Well, I can say two things about this. One, yes, the constitution will be changed. There will be more money. But I also explained that more money is not the solution in itself. The structures need to be changed. I mean, we can spend money on defense, on PowerPoint presentations, on military capabilities that we will have in 2035. What does it help anyone? We have a capability lack in Europe with standoff weapons, with ground-based, long-distance precision fire. And now we know that we cannot rely on the United States of America. How long does it take us to develop the capability? I mean, those are real problems. You cannot just solve them by money. And my second point is, we are faced with an enemy, Russia, who believes that losing 800 to 1,000 soldiers per day is more or less a successful approach. This cannot be solved by money alone. This is a whole of society defense approach. This is a mental approach. This is a readiness approach. It's much more than just buying things. And we should not reduce the European defense discussion to buying things with a lot of money.
Absolutely. There needs to be coordination and the political will and structures. But given the fact that there are scenarios in which the United States pulls out of NATO, where do you think we should be going when it comes to our vision of reliable structures and the political organization of how we envision collective defense in Europe post-US?
Less paper, less ideas about other ideas. Let's do things. No general concepts where we spend a lot of time to develop an overall concept of European defense and then maybe do something in a couple of years from now. We need long-range distance fires now. Let's produce something. Let's do a joint venture with Ukraine, who are far more advanced than we are on this, and let's produce those weapons. Let's get spiral development for drones on track and spend on it. I'm saying it that way because I'm afraid the Europeans are very good in writing papers about other papers and having things like rearm Europe and marketing political ideas. But it's not about that. It's about the real threat and about doing real things. And Russia is not watching the words. So Russia is watching the deeds. And I would push for that in Germany. But I think that needs to be the European discussion, getting real about this.
Let me get back to what you've mentioned about the need to change the mindset, except for changing everything else, structures and buys and army itself. As we know, Germany has spent a great deal of 20th century to disarm itself mentally and to change. And then a few decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, they've spent a lot of time in making Russia a friend, certainly a partner, certainly a business partner, very important. If you say that Russia is the enemy, and you said it very explicitly, does the German society today accept that approach?
Yeah, Russia romanticism is over in Germany. I mean, it took Germans a long time, but it's clearly over. And let's not put the focus on the wrong things. Yes, there are pro-Russian parties in the German political sphere. Yes, there are people criticizing defense spending. There are people repeating the Russian propaganda lines. But we do not need 100% consensus. We need a majority that is able to make a decision. And I think that's what German policymakers have to learn. It's not about convincing everybody. It's about finding a majority and moving forward. And if you look into the history of German major security policy decisions, rearmament, NATO double-track decision, those were decisions taken against enormous resistance, where large parts of German society were against it and were protesting it. So we need political leaders who have the power to show clarity and orientation and who have the audacity to decide things and move forward. We have a ridiculous debate in Germany about conscription. It's typical German European in the sense of that everybody is happy, oh, we are having a good discussion. But when will we actually have a decision about this? I think Putin will not be scared by us having a good discussion about things.
So let's look at Ukraine for a second. There are conversations ongoing, potentially a ceasefire that will soon be in place.
Which it won't.
Okay, so you don't see that as a viable scenario. Let's say that we do manage to have even a 30-day ceasefire. What will be the reactions of Europeans? And here I see this developing in the direction of divisions among Europeans because viewed from the eastern flank here from Poland, this is not a permanent solution in no way. We envisage Russia reattacking quite soon and breaking the ceasefire. Should we fear that some reactions, perhaps in Germany, would be that this is a permanent solution and therefore we can restart our connections to Russia?
First of all, I do not really understand where the hope for a ceasefire is coming from. And it's an interesting contradiction. Everybody says, oh, Trump is a little weird, but at the same time, we believe that he can pull a rabbit out of the hat and do something that nobody else could do before. Why should that be possible? I mean, I don't have to explain to you here in Poland that you need to put pressure on Putin in order to force him to a ceasefire and force him to the table. Is there any pressure that you see?
How do we do that?
Forcing him? Well, Trump has one idea, bringing the oil price down. Last time I checked, it was $70 per barrel. It needs to be below 40 to really be a financial problem for Russia. Is that going to happen? I think it's rather unlikely. I think the biggest mistake the Europeans can do at this point is sit on their hands, watch Trump TV, and think that some magic happens. I think we should all the time continue supporting Ukraine and building our own capabilities and prepare for a European military presence in Ukraine. Because the answer to your question is the ceasefire can only hold if there is a military presence of Europeans in Ukraine, providing back cover for the 800,000 or so armed forces of Ukraine.
Do you think there's appetite in the potential coalition in Germany for the security guarantees in Ukraine through boots on the ground?
Well, first of all, I believe it's doable to have a military presence of Europeans in Ukraine that will help the armed forces of Ukraine by preserving a ceasefire and potentially a peace. The key question is whether there will be US backup from outside of Ukraine or not. Difficult to find out at this point. In the Helmut Kohlian sense of understanding Europe that I see in Friedrich Merz, there is no way for Germany to stay away from this. All major European security questions have to be shaped by Germany, and Germany has to take part in them. So I think the German position that we heard from Scholz and Merz so far, which basically was, that is not a question that is on the table right now, will not be enough because the question is on the table, and it is on the table right now. Germany has to be part of a European military presence in Ukraine. It's interesting that a non-EU European country with the UK is taking the leadership in this, but without European military presence in Ukraine being ready to be deployed, President Zelensky will not be able to negotiate anything meaningful. I think that is something we have to be aware of.
More questions that arise, but I think we'll leave it at that. And I think that there's a lot that we have to work out, but a lot of fertile ground for those discussions.
Yeah, but let's just do it. Let's not write a lot of papers on it. Let's just move ahead.
Thank you, Nico.
Thank you. Sini, thank you very much for meeting me here today. We are at the Warsaw European Conversation, and we literally just came out of a panel where we heard a couple of speakers talking about the new security architecture around Europe, Europe's approach and different views on where we are going in our relationship with the United States. And it was quite surprising that, and this is something that we spoke about just coming up to this recording, that we heard Camille Grand, who's a colleague, distinguished fellow at ECFR, talk about Finland. And his idea is that given the circumstances in which we are, the geopolitical shifts that we're noticing, Europeans and individual European states should, in the relationship to the United States, be less like Denmark, who is considered an ally that was very reliable to the United States and going along with many ideas put forward on the table, but rather be like Finland. And this is where I want to start this conversation. What do you think about that? How do you understand that statement? Do you think it is the right path for Europe?
I was really surprised by that reference as well. I have to say that in Finland, we often think that the Swedes are incredible in marketing and we are very bad at that. But somehow in these security-related conversations, I think that we have also been able to, push some messages through clearly. And Finland is now very often the reference point in many conversations. To be honest...
Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, I think there is the whole background that Finland has always had only one existential threat, and that has been Russia. For many years, I think, not like in Europe, there were also different viewpoints. It wasn't really clear what was the threat perception. But now I think with the new strategic concept, it is that NATO is becoming more like Finland in a way that the main adversary is really Russia. And this is the most acute and most fundamental security threat that Europe should be concerned about and should really prepare for. So in a way, NATO has become more Finnish already. But then the other side of the coin is really that since Finland was militarily non-aligned for such a long time, we did develop our own capabilities and we tried to build our own deterrence against Russia. And now when, everything is in flux in Europe right now, in a way, this is always the fallback that, what can you deliver? And for Finland, I think it's not only what we can do alone, but it is also the Nordic cooperation, like the Nordic 5, the NORDEFCO cooperation on security matters. And also when we were not members of NATO, for us, like the Joint Expeditionary Force led by the UK was also another format where we could cooperate with NATO countries and we could get as close to NATO as possible without being a member. So in a way, you have to have certain amount of flexibility and fallback options when, the world is going crazy. And I think the Finnish experience could also be an example for Ukraine, how to go forward now that the NATO membership is, at least for the next 4 years, off the table.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I'm going to put the conversation onto these tracks. So what we're observing, obviously, there are direct conversations happening on the topic of Ukraine right now, whether we're going into a ceasefire, whether it's going to be lasting, and so on. But without diving into that conversation, the other facade that we're seeing of Russia and that we're all experiencing as Europeans, some more acutely than others, are the hybrid threats, is the coercion that has been going on for a long time, whether it's through oil and gas and cyber attacks and constant disinformation that is unsettling our societies. Now, coming back to this Finnish preparedness and how you mentioned that Finland has perceived this environment as unstable and therefore has prepared itself. Does that mean, from a Finnish perspective, that we are still in a time of peace, or considering what's happening acutely and with growing intensity, does that mean that we are actually already at war?
Excellent question, but very difficult to answer. I guess it also depends who we are. If we are Europe, it is undeniable that we are at war because there is war raging in Europe, in Ukraine. So definitely war has come to Europe. This is clear. But if we consider that NATO or the EU as we, then I would say that we are not at war. But perhaps the question in itself is a wrong way to approach the question, because we should also think what Russia thinks. And I think Russia definitely is at war with us. And in general, I think in Russia's kind of strategic thinking, there isn't really very clear escalation ladder in a way. There is not like peace where everything is nice and sun is shining and there are strawberries, and then there is like war where different rules apply. I think it's much more like continuum where you can move, at least in the escalation ladder, in a very flexible manner. It is full spectrum war that you can use different methods. You can escalate in one theater and then kind of stabilize the situation in other theater. You can combine those. It can be horizontal, vertical. You can use the hybrid tools instead of the kind of kinetic military tools. You can combine it any way you want to. And this is the mindset. And definitely Russia is not only at war with Ukraine, Russia is at war also with Europe.
And are we reacting adequately?
So far, we haven't been reacting adequately, that is for sure. And now, of course, we have new set of issues and challenges emerging when there is a danger also that the West is somehow dividing into kind of the post-liberal West and the liberal West. And it is very difficult. And it is also not unimaginable that, we would see the same divisions within Europe. So I think this is really the time to put our act together and act unitedly and act fast. It's incredible how snail-paced really things like our preparedness and our kind of capability development has been, even since February 2022. So I think that we should really kind of switch ourselves to crisis mode in a way and start delivering and not just talking.
But given the fact that both our countries, here in Poland, we're spending 4.7, and Finland's preparedness, whole society preparedness for a potential kinetic war with Russia is very much more advanced than Western Europeans. Do you feel that there are still adjustments within Finland and Poland that should happen, or is there such a big divide of what needs to happen? And what is it that we could take from this mindset?
I think that it is really up to us to convince the other Europeans to really see the crucial link between Ukraine and the security in Europe, and how fundamentally important it is. And I think in Finland, you don't really have to explain that to anyone. It is self-evident, and it is bipartisan support for that idea. I mean, we have the far-right populist party in the government who completely share the same threat perceptions as any other party. So it goes across the society. And I think the society needs to be on board not only if the war breaks out, but it is also because of the hybridity of the threat that Russia poses. Because oftentimes, I mean, the first line of defense, it is businesses or civil society actors or local governments. The decisions are not necessarily made on the highest level, but you have to share the same perception throughout the society. Otherwise, it won't work.
And I'm sure that economically speaking, that also has its advantages, which is perhaps one of the selling points that could be the case in Western Europe. But there could be so many more questions asked on that topic. But I'm going to shift into the United States and talk a little bit about that. So you mentioned that there is a new set of challenges with the West being divided. And you also mentioned that Finland only had one existential threat. Now, obviously, we're all witnessing every single day a lot of information coming in from the US administration, and especially looking at the decisions being made around Ukraine. That poses a whole new set of challenges. How is this being discussed in Finland without going into where you think it's going to develop into Ukraine, because you're going to be speaking at a panel about the issue of Ukraine. But as you mentioned, there's potential for major divisions among Europeans when it comes to the US question, how we view it and how we view its long-term effects on Europe. Where does Finland lie in that conversation?
Well, I think Finland is by definition a small state. And for small states, I think these are fundamentally important issues. I mean, it is really about state survival, because if we agree with the notion that there will be different categories of independent or sovereign states in Europe, European states that would be fully sovereign and the others that would be kind of coerced into submission and having a partial sovereignty. This is a danger for each and every small state in Europe. And I think, as it has been famously put, I mean, there are only two types of countries in Europe: small states and small states that do not yet realize that they are small. So I think here we should really see it as an existential threat, not only towards countries like Estonia or Finland, but Europe as a whole. And if we value the European kind of system where we do embrace cooperative security, that we can trust our neighbors and we can build security together, I think we have to realize that also needs to be defended. And in the worst case, I mean, it needs to be defended militarily. If we do not do that, then we kind of acquiescence to the world of great powers that will step all over Europe, and there won't be anything left of the European institutions that we value.
Building on that, so Finland recently made a big change and joined NATO. In retrospect, given what we are witnessing right now, do you still think that being a part of NATO is what provides the sort of protection that we need from Russia?
Yeah, there is a bit of a irony there. I think that when we finally get to NATO, and then it seems to be like that it is shaking. But no, more seriously, I think, of course, we are very grateful for the fact that we managed to get to NATO, because I don't know what would happen now if we tried to apply for NATO. I mean, it was really a window of opportunity. And the feeling in Finland is that it was really Ukraine and the brave Ukrainians that were fighting for their independence and freedom that really held the door open for Sweden and Finland. And I think that there is a strong sense of disappointment in Finland also, that now the very same door is slammed shut on Ukraine. And there is a feeling that we all should do more. And Finland and all the Nordic Baltic countries, they do support very strongly Ukraine's NATO membership as well as EU membership. Now it seems that at least for the next 4 years, NATO membership is out of the question. But I think that what we should at least try to do is really to get Ukraine as close to NATO as possible. And perhaps also learning from the Finnish experience, like the interoperability, the joint trainings, just to be ready when the opportunity perhaps once again arises, then later on, that we are able to then seize the moment and act upon that plan.
What about your own protection? Because joining NATO is obviously a decision that comes with a set of security guarantees in the form of Article 5. And now with an unstable environment and unreliability of the partner that provided for the stability, do you feel that the threat from Russia is more acute? And let's put it bluntly for the sake of the conversation, if Article 5 is no longer valid, is the fallback option your own self-sufficiency that you can rely on? Or is it the Nordic-Baltic 8? Or is it perhaps an evolving new security architecture in Europe, which is not a good question to ask at the end of a conversation because it's the opening to an entirely new conversation. But where do you see that going?
To be honest, I mean, we do not doubt Article 5, and that is, of course, the starting point for everything. But then again, I think I at least understood Camille Khan's comments today at the panel that Europe should become more like Finland, meaning that it is that you do your utmost within the context of NATO. You do everything you can in the context of EU. But then again, you also have your own ideas and you take care of your security by yourself as well. So you're not completely reliant on others, but there is a sense of autonomy within those structures. So it's not autonomy outside, but it is kind of in addition to those and supporting those memberships and the partnerships that are important. And I think this is exactly the way forward for other European countries as well, just to perhaps have plan A and plan B and also some flexibility and also be active and bringing the initiatives and the ideas. How can we build European security together?
This is certainly a time to think about these changes, to act and to look towards other examples of countries that have managed this so well. Thank you very much for this conversation.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We teamed up with ECFR to try and make sense of the world and its challenges, to provide the actionable knowledge which helps better understand, decide, act. I hope these conversations were a step in that direction. See you next year at the Warsaw European Conversation.